Finally, the burden is gone. Starting today, my parents are moving in with us.
Right after my parents passed away, my husband, who had demolished my parents' house, said this to me as I stood dumbfounded in front of the place where my family home used to be. "What are you talking about?"
Have you lost your mind? Hurry up and bring the inheritance over to our place.
I couldn't help but burst out laughing at his words. Ah, I see. So that's what this is about, I thought.
What's so funny? What are you laughing at?
Don't you guys know?
Know what?
Kevin and my in-laws looked at me suspiciously as I laughed. I decided to tell those three the truth. My name is Mary. I was born as the eldest daughter to ordinary, office worker parents. I have one older brother. It was a very ordinary family. At the age of 29, I married my husband, Kevin, and we had 2 children. While juggling work, I struggled with raising the kids, and before I knew it, I was already 55 years old. My son, Tony, and my daughter, Kathy, have both grown up to become respectable members of society. Now, they each live on their own, seemingly working hard at jobs they are still getting used to. From now on, I can take it easy with my husband. It has been an ordinary life, but a happy one. I thought I would continue to grow old like this. But this ordinary life changed dramatically on a winter's day. My father was in a car accident and suddenly passed away. At that time, he was only 72. My once healthy father was suddenly gone, and the entire family was engulfed in grief. Especially my mother, who fell into a deep depression and could barely eat. "Mom, I know you're sad, but you have to eat." I told her that repeatedly.
I understand, but I just don't have an appetite. It feels like there's a tightness in my chest.
Both my brother and I thought it was a mental issue and decided to keep an eye on her for a while. However, in just about half a month, my mother rapidly lost weight. Feeling that something was definitely wrong, I took her to the hospital. "What? Cancer?" I was stunned when the doctor told me my mother's diagnosis. The cancer was advanced, surgery was not an option, and she was given about a year to live. I hadn't even had the chance to show my gratitude to my mother. Just when I thought we were dealing with the loss of my father, now my mother was facing this. I was even more devastated than I had been by my father's death. But there was no time to be sad forever. My brother lived far away, so I couldn't rely on him. That meant I had to be the one to help my mother. I immediately told Kevin that I wanted my mother to live with us. I couldn't leave my sick mother alone, both for her mental and physical well-being. However, Kevin's reaction was unexpected.
What? The funeral just ended, and now we still have to deal with your parents.
Kevin sighed in annoyance as he spoke. "You don't have to put it that way.
Can't you just drive her to and from the hospital? Why do we have to live together?"
I'm sure she feels lonely. If it's not okay, could I at least stay at my parents' house for a while?" I said. Then, Kevin, looking angry, replied.
What? And during that time, what about my meals?
"I'll come back to cook for you, of course."
What about cleaning? Who's going to do the laundry?
I fell silent. I intended to do what I could, but I knew I couldn't do everything like before. It hurt to be criticized on that point. If he called my wish to help and care for my mother selfish, I wouldn't have a response. Surely, my mother would hesitate and say it was fine to keep things as they were. But I desperately wanted to show my gratitude to my mother.
Fine, but in return, I'm not helping with anything.
Seeing me silent, Kevin reluctantly agreed. He acted arrogantly, but in the end, he gave in. I'm sorry. Thank you. I thought his attitude was awful, but it was true that he accepted my request. I held back the urge to argue and thanked him. After some trouble, Kevin and I began living with my mother at my parents' house. We had originally been living in a company-owned apartment provided by Kevin's employer. Kevin is an only child. Since his father had specifically requested to live together, we hadn't planned to buy our own home. Eventually, we were supposed to live with his parents. For now, the company apartment was convenient for commuting, and the rent wasn't a significant burden, around $1,000 per month. However, moving to my parents' house eliminated that payment, and we also had more space. So living with my mother wasn't all disadvantages for Kevin, either. As Kevin had declared, he didn't help with anything, but I was glad to be living with my mother. She seemed fine, but she often felt fatigued and spent much of the day lying down. I prepared her meals, helped her eat, and organized her medications. She wouldn't have been able to do it all alone.
I'm sorry, Mary. Thank you. It's a great help to have you here with me. I must thank Kevin as well.
My mother frequently expressed her gratitude to both of us. Since I hadn't told her about the harsh words Kevin had said when we decided to live together, she was also grateful to him. One day, after my mother had gone to bed, Kevin came home. As I served his meal, I said, "About my mother's treatment." Before I could finish, Kevin glared at me sharply.
I don't care. I told you I wouldn't help with anything.
He refused even to listen. I also needed someone to talk to, someone to share my burdens and concerns with. I just wanted Kevin to listen. But even after a month, even after 2 months, his attitude didn't change. He grumbled about living together, and his words and behavior suggested he thought he was doing us a great favor, growing worse day by day. But there was nothing I could say in response. Worrying about my mother and being considerate of Kevin only built up more stress for me. Around the time we reached the 1-year mark since my mother's prognosis, her health suddenly deteriorated, and she was hospitalized. 3 days later, she passed away. Even though I had prepared myself, I was deeply saddened. My brother's family and my children rushed over to help, which was comforting, but at times like these, I want my husband by my side. However, Kevin was laughing with his parents in a corner, not helping at all with the funeral arrangements. My brother took on the role of chief mourner, and somehow, the preparations were completed. But instead of sitting in the bereaved families section, Kevin chose the very back of the relatives' seating area. "I'd like you to sit in the family section, Kevin." When I said that, Kevin replied,
No, I'm fine here. I'm not actually a blood relative.
"But you are my husband." Hearing this, my mother-in-law chimed in.
He's your husband, but he's not your mother's son, is he? Kevin is my son, so he's a stranger, an outsider.
Exactly. We're Kevin's parents. Mary, you can sit in the family section.
With even my in-laws saying this, I fell silent. While customs may vary by region, in our area, where both my family and my in-laws live, it is common for a son-in-law to sit in the family section. As expected, since Kevin was nowhere to be seen in the family section, I could hear whispers from distant relatives. Did they get divorced? I thought it was ridiculous for people to gossip like that, but it all could have been avoided if Kevin had just sat with us. Though I felt a bit resentful that Kevin wasn't by my side, we managed to see my mother off properly. After the funeral, my brother's family, my children, Kevin, my in-laws, and I returned home. Steve, Martha. Thank you for coming during such a busy time. I thanked my in-laws for attending and served them tea. Then, they laughed and said,
Really? First your father passed away, and now your mother. Our expenses for condolences are piling up.
But at least this is the last one, right?
I froze at their words. What were they thinking, saying something like this? I could hardly believe it. Forcing a polite smile, I excused myself from the room. As I walked away, I could hear Kevin and his parents talking behind me.
It must have been tough for you too, Kevin, living with a stranger.
Yeah, Mary's selfishness was a real pain.
You know, there's no good in just following your wife's orders. You're a married couple, so you have every right to say no to things you don't like.
I clenched my fist tightly. The sound of the three of them chatting and laughing made me feel both angry and disgusted, but this wasn't the first time. My in-laws had always been insensitive and rude like this. When I was getting married to Kevin, Martha said,
Wasn't there a prettier girl available? I guess we can't expect much from the grandchildren now.
And Steve said,
They say you get bored of a beautiful woman in 3 days, but with Mary, you'll never get tired.
Kevin had laughed and found it funny. That's the kind of rude family they were. It felt like something inside me snapped. Thinking back, not once during my father's funeral or after my mother's passing had my in-laws or Kevin shown any concern for me. On the contrary, they only made remarks that mocked me. I had felt guilty for forcing Kevin into living with my mother, but now I began to question whether Kevin's behavior had been appropriate as a person. All I wanted was to focus on my mother, to give her a proper farewell, yet I had been too concerned about Kevin's feelings. If he had been supportive, maybe it would have made sense, but he hadn't been at all, and there was no reason for me to feel guilty toward him. As anger simmered within me, Kevin and my in-laws continued their loud, laughing conversation in the background. Had my brother's family or the children heard it, they would have been upset, but thankfully, they were all in the kitchen. Kevin and my in-laws were in a separate room, so I was the only one who heard their conversation, and for that, I was relieved. As I was thinking about this, I heard my mother-in-law's voice again.
Mary.
Yes? I quickly responded, startled.
May I have this?
In her hand, as she approached, was my mother's bag. Not understanding what she meant, I hesitantly replied, and she continued.
Your mother can't use it anymore, right? Kevin suggested I take it home. So, I thought I might just take it.
She raised the bag, inspecting it as if appraising its value. It was incredibly rude, considering the funeral had just ended. I snatched the bag from her and said, "No, you can't."
What?
Her expression changed. She looked more angry that I, her daughter-in-law, had dared to oppose her rather than about having the bag taken away. Still, I stood my ground and said, "I'm not ready to do anything with my mother's belongings yet. We'll handle the keepsakes among the family later." Martha turned red with anger.
What did you say? Are you calling me an outsider?
Just a moment ago, you said even Kevin was a stranger to my mother at the funeral. So why would you, as Kevin's mother, be considered family? I couldn't help but retort. Hearing this, Kevin and my father-in-law also turned red with anger.
What are you talking about? Apologize to my mother.
How dare a mere daughter-in-law say such rude things?
The commotion grew so loud that everyone from the other room came to see what was happening.
I didn't expect to be called an outsider after attending the funeral and staying through the cremation. Let's go, Steve!
Shouting at me in front of everyone, Martha stormed out of our house. For some reason, Kevin was also furious and left with his parents.
What happened? Did you really call your mother-in-law an outsider?
Only hearing Martha's words, everyone asked me. Of course, if you only heard that part, it would sound like I was being harsh. But I explained the situation to everyone. Not a single person blamed me.
Grandma and Grandpa should have been more considerate of other people's feelings.
Dad is the same way. That whole family has always been like that.
Even my children stood by my side, but I still couldn't bring myself to forgive those three. Kevin didn't come home for a while after that day. I didn't reach out to him either. I didn't feel it was right for me to apologize, and even if he apologized, I wasn't sure I could forgive him. However, we couldn't continue like this forever. One day, just as I was thinking that, Kevin came home. "Welcome back." Seeing his face, my anger flared up again, but I suppressed it and greeted him. Then Kevin said,
It must have been tough for you.
He was blunt, but I was surprised by the words that seemed to show concern for me.
Why don't you go on a trip with the kids? It might help you feel better.
With that, he handed me some travel vouchers. I couldn't find the words to respond. Instead, tears started flowing down my cheeks. Maybe it was the kids who had suggested it. But even so, I was happy that Kevin had gone along with it. Following his suggestion, I immediately contacted the kids and set a date for the trip.
Huh. Dad suggested this?
That's rare for him.
The kids seemed surprised by my proposal. It seemed that the gift was really from Kevin himself. Maybe Kevin feels bad about everything. I laughed as I said that. And so, I gratefully accepted the travel vouchers from Kevin. Well, I'm off then.
Yeah. Take it easy. While you're at it, you should stay with the kids too.
What? I can't be away that long.
It's fine. I'll be relaxing at my parents' place, so don't worry about me.
With those words, Kevin sent me off. Kathy was also happy to have me visit, so I decided to stop by Kathy's house first and then Tony's before my trip. Since I hadn't been able to visit while taking care of my mother, I made some prepared dishes and froze them to help out a bit with the kids' household chores.
Mom, you're not taking it easy at all. But it's a big help. Thanks.
Both of them were delighted to have my cooking at home. And it was all thanks to Kevin's suggestion. And then came the long-awaited trip. I spent a relaxing time at the resort with my children. I felt that much of my exhaustion from caregiving and the sorrow of losing my parents had been healed. I had been away for nearly a week, but both of my children returned to their homes with bright smiles.
That was fun. I guess we should thank Dad once in a while.
Yeah, once in a while. But do you think he might be up to something? Dot.
Kathy laughed jokingly. Don't say that. He thought about it in his own way. I laughed too. I headed home, thinking about sharing many stories from the trip with Kevin and hoping to move forward with our life together as a couple, finding happiness again. When I arrived home, I was at a loss for words. What is going on? Where is the house? I looked around in confusion, trying to confirm where I was. This was undoubtedly the familiar place, but my family home, which should have been there, was gone. Suddenly, Kevin appeared out of nowhere. Behind him were his parents, grinning as they watched me stand there in shock. Kevin, what is going on? I asked him. Then, with the same unsettling smile as his parents, Kevin replied,
Finally, the burden is gone. From today, you'll be living with my parents in my house.
What are you talking about? I calmly responded to Kevin's arrogant declaration. Kevin then spoke again.
Have you lost your mind? Your family home has already been demolished. Just bring the inheritance over to our place.
Whatever you inherited belongs to Kevin, anyway.
I see, I thought. It became clear that Kevin was behind the demolition of the house and that his motive was to get his hands on the inheritance. I had returned home thinking about our future, but this was such a betrayal. I was filled with anger and sadness. But even if they went so far as to demolish the house, I would never let things go Kevin's way. I resolved not to give in. Looking at the three of them smirking, I burst out laughing. I laughed uncontrollably, and Kevin and his parents looked at me with puzzled expressions.
What's so funny? Why are you laughing?
She's a strange woman. Has she gone mad?
Martha looked at me as if she were seeing something eerie. Facing the three of them, I spoke. Don't you know?
Know what?
I replied to Kevin. I didn't inherit a single dollar. There's no inheritance at all. After saying that, I started laughing again. Maybe they had foolishly assumed I'd become rich from some inheritance. I couldn't stop laughing at the three of them, acting on their assumptions.
What? What do you mean? Explain it clearly.
Kevin shouted, but I kept my mouth shut. I didn't feel the need to explain anything to him. Before that, I'm not living with strangers. If you want to live together, do it by yourself. Ignoring Kevin's question, I refused his initial suggestion, which set Martha off like a spark.
You helped your own parents with household chores, but you won't do ours?
I think you know there were circumstances behind that, don't you?
I agreed to live with you.
I said you didn't need to live with us. Or have you forgotten that you chose to live together just to avoid doing housework? As I continued to retort, Kevin and his mother bit their lips. And demolishing my family home without permission. There are things you can and can't do. I shouted at the three of them right then and there and left. From behind, I heard Kevin's voice shouting, "Where are you going?" But I didn't look back. I needed to find a place to sleep tonight, so I couldn't waste time on this, and I genuinely didn't want to see Kevin's face anymore. I immediately consulted a lawyer. It's not something that can be done so easily, demolishing a house. The house is still under my mother's name. As I wondered which company had taken on the job, an unbelievable fact came to light. It turned out that Kevin and his father had dismantled the house themselves. They enlisted the help of a friend of Kevin's father who works for a demolition company and rented heavy machinery, carefully preparing for everything. Moreover, they had even given me the travel vouchers to get me out of the house. I felt like crying at my own foolishness for being so easily deceived, and I was filled with frustration. Is there any way to punish these three? I pleaded, crying, and the lawyer gave me a kind smile.
Since Kevin dismantled a house that was still under your mother's name without permission, he could be charged with property destruction. And you could claim damages. Let's start by ensuring that Kevin and his parents offer a proper apology.
I nodded at those words. The lawyer immediately began the process. A few days later, Kevin, having learned of the situation, called me in a rage.
What's with that certified letter?
Oh, it arrived? Well, you destroyed a precious house. You'll have to pay for it.
Pay for it? I told you we were moving into my family home. We did you a favor by tearing down a house no one was going to live in. You should be grateful, not demanding compensation. Now, hurry up and bring the inheritance back to our place.
Kevin arrogantly stated. Grateful for you tearing it down? Don't make me laugh. And as for bringing the inheritance, what inheritance? I didn't inherit anything. I shouted into the phone. Kevin was at a loss for words, falling silent. It seemed my yelling had caught him off guard since I was not someone who usually raised my voice. The reason I laughed when I saw the house demolished was exactly this. I had spent a whole year with my mother. Of course, we had talked about the inheritance. And I had said, I don't need anything. Give everything to my brother. So, my brother inherited all the cash and securities. My brother suggested that I take the house instead. He lived far away and couldn't manage the house. If I didn't want to live there, I could always rent it out. With that understanding, I was supposed to inherit the house. In any case, either you and your father restore the house to its original state, or pay the amount stated in the document.
This amount?
I'm even offering to settle this privately. If you can't pay, I'll file a damage report and start legal proceedings. I said firmly.
I'm sorry. I didn't think you'd be this angry.
Of course, I'm angry. Kevin began mumbling excuses. It seemed he thought that as long as my family home existed, he wouldn't be able to live with his parents. His father, in particular, had always wanted to live with us. He liked Tony and had hoped to live together with him. At that time, it was Kevin who refused to live together, saying it would be too difficult to commute, but his parents apparently thought I was the one who was opposed to it. So, Kevin convinced them that by demolishing my family home, I would move in with the inheritance, thus forcing his parents to agree. But even if he explained it now, there was no way I could forgive him.
So, please, forgive me. I didn't mean any harm. My dad is sorry too.
If you're truly sorry, then all the more reason to agree to a settlement. With that, I hung up the phone. Kevin kept calling me and sending messages to apologize. If you're really sorry, just make the payment quickly. I coldly dismissed Kevin. I knew there was no way the house could be restored, but I had no other way to deal with these unbearable feelings. After that, I stayed at Kathy's house. My brother's family, as well as my children, were aware of the situation. My brother, who was also surely angry about our family home being destroyed without permission, said,
I won't interfere, but I'll help if needed. Do what you want, Mary.
Everyone condemned Kevin's actions and supported me. A month passed without any compensation for damages or emotional distress being paid. During this time, there was no contact from Kevin. I couldn't stay at Kathy's place forever. I wanted to receive the money quickly and at least get my life back on track. But contrary to my wishes, something unbelievable happened. It was revealed by a single comment from Kathy.
Hey, this apron looks a lot like Grandma's.
As she murmured, Kathy showed me her smartphone screen. Seeing the screen, I was wide-eyed. It was the product page on a flea market app. The item Kathy said looked like my mother's apron was a unique piece I had made for her. What's going on? This is Grandma's apron. I made it, so there's no mistake.
What?
Kathy hurriedly began checking other pages. It seemed the seller had just recently registered. They had no transaction history or ratings yet. Upon examining the nearly 30 items already listed, I was shocked to discover that all of them belonged to my mother. I immediately had a hunch. This must be Kevin's doing, I thought. No one but Kevin, who had demolished the house, could have taken my mother's belongings. I immediately called Kevin. What is going on with that app?
App?
He replied as if annoyed. Thinking he was trying to play dumb, I got furious. Don't pretend you don't know. You're selling my mother's belongings without permission, aren't you? Cancel those listings immediately. Kevin, sounding flustered, said,
What? No. It wasn't me.
Who else would do such a thing besides you? I'm coming over to get everything back right now. I hung up and, with Kathy, headed straight to my in-laws' house. Where are my mother's belongings? As soon as we arrived, I called out for Kevin. Confronting Kevin at the front door, I pressed him.
I don't know.
Dad. Be honest.
Kathy backed me up, pressing Kevin. He was visibly flustered. While we were arguing, my in-laws must have noticed our presence and appeared.
Oh, Kathy, you're here?
Martha smiled happily at the sight of Kathy. Kathy, showing her anger, spoke to her grandmother.
Grandma, tell Dad to tell the truth.
The truth?
It looks like Dad is selling the things that belong to Grandma, who passed away recently.
Hearing Kathy's words, Martha burst out laughing. Kevin frowned and kept saying, "It really wasn't me." Then Martha loudly declared,
Selling things? Kevin wouldn't do that.
But
Because I'm the one selling them.
I felt the blood drain from my face at her words. Kevin must have known. He looked at his mother with a face that seemed to say, "This is bad." Even though Kathy was dumbfounded, Martha remained cheerful. "What did you just say?"
It's quite a hassle, you know? I have to pack everything carefully, and I need to take good photos.
She seemed unaware that selling stolen items was wrong, speaking excitedly about the app. I had to fight the urge to jump at her.
cancel the listings. These are not things you have the right to sell.
Kathy, now red-faced and teary, pleaded with her. But Martha looked dissatisfied.
What? I finally found a fun hobby. I can use things I find useful, sell the rest for pocket money, and it's great for keeping my mind active. Now that I'm the only grandma left, don't you want me to live a long, healthy life, Kathy?
She said this so casually. Even when I begged her to stop, she showed no remorse. But if she wouldn't listen, then it was time to take action. "Kathy, let's go."
But
"It's fine." I dragged Kathy out of the house. We went straight to the police. I hadn't intended to file a report for the demolition of the house, but theft was a different matter. When I reported that my mother's belongings had been stolen and were being sold without permission, the police acted quickly, and the flea market app suspended Martha's account. At least now, nothing more could be sold, and I felt a bit relieved. On the way back from the police station, I called Kevin. "I had your mother's account suspended. You knew about it, didn't you? You're just as guilty."
No!
"And I've filed a report for this case. I expect you to cooperate with the investigation." Kevin became flustered at my words.
Wait! We're family, right? Please withdraw it.
"We're strangers, remember? You still haven't paid the compensation or damages for the house, and you don't show any signs of remorse." I shouted, and Kevin was at a loss for words. But I'm not heartless. Regardless of my in-laws, I do have some feelings for Kevin, having lived with him for so long. I sighed and continued. "I'll wait for the money, but I have no intention of forgiving the theft. I want everything returned. Also, what about your father? He looked quite unwell. Has he been to a hospital?"
What?
I'm not heartless, so I'm just letting you know. With that, I ended the call. I had just seen my father-in-law for the first time in a long while. He barely spoke, and he was so emaciated that it was hard to believe it had only been a few months since we last met. His complexion was beyond pale. It was almost dark. It was obvious he wasn't healthy. But that family probably hadn't noticed. a mother-in-law who was casually trying to sell stolen goods, and Kevin, who only acted tough with me. That family has no sense of consideration for others. The next day, I received a call from my father-in-law. I thought he might thank me, but it was the exact opposite.
What's the idea of treating me like a sick person? Are you trying to shove me into a hospital to get rid of me? I have to protect Martha and Kevin from you. I'm not going to any hospital.
He scolded me over the phone. I had expressed concern for him, and this was his response. I apologize for saying something unnecessary. I was just worried.
Unlike your parents, I'm not weak or short-lived. Don't insult me.
I was furious at his words, but a few days later, he apparently felt unwell enough to go to the hospital. The diagnosis was terminal cancer. Kevin, in a panic, called me.
Dad has terminal cancer. What should I do? I.
But I snorted. I don't know. When I advised him to go to the hospital, do you know what he said? He said, "I'm not weak or short-lived like your parents. Do as you please."
What? I never thought you could be so heartless, Mary.
Who's the heartless one? Did you ever offer a single kind word when my mother was ill? Reflect on your own actions so far. I left him with those words and hung up the phone. As expected, Steve passed away shortly thereafter. As a person, I didn't want to hold on to negative feelings towards someone who had died, but recalling all the things he had done and said, I couldn't shed a single tear. After Steve's funeral, a will was found. I was taken aback by how prepared he had been, despite claiming he wouldn't die young or be weak.
The house goes to my grandson, Tony. The remaining assets will be split between my wife and my son.
I was surprised to see Tony's name mentioned. Come to think of it, Steve had always favored Tony and had expressed a desire to live with him. Even after his death, he wanted Tony to live in this house. From Tony's perspective, it was an unwanted burden. Renounce the inheritance. You don't need that house. I told Tony, but he seemed happy to inherit it. There would only be inheritance taxes, and there were no benefits for Tony. I considered it an annoying burden, but if he was happy about it, there was nothing more for me to say. Following my father-in-law's will, Tony inherited the house. Martha was delighted and paid the inheritance tax.
He's the heir to our family, after all. It's only natural.
Well, she wasn't wrong about that. I felt a bit down, as if Tony had been taken away from me, but then something unbelievable happened.
Come to our place.
After receiving that call from Kevin, I immediately headed to my in-laws' house. And there they were, Martha and Kevin, standing in shock in front of their house, just like I had once stood. On the property of the family home were heavy machinery, trucks with the demolition company's name, and workers. In front of us, the family home was being torn down. What is going on?
It's my house, right? I can do whatever I want with it.
Tony appeared out of nowhere, looking quite pleased as he watched the house being demolished.
Tony! What's going on? Stop this right now.
Even if you stop it now, you won't be able to live here anyway.
Tony, how could you do this?
Martha and Kevin pleaded with Tony, but Tony just laughed.
Did you forget that Grandpa and Dad did the exact same thing to Mom?
Tony.
Grandma, you were awful to Mom too, weren't you? Did you ever apologize?
His smile turned into a sharp glare as he stared down Martha and Kevin. At his fierce gaze, both of them sank to their knees. The heavy machinery continued to make loud noises as it kept tearing down the house. Watching this scene, I finally felt a sense of relief. Afterward, Kevin finally paid the damages and compensation with the inheritance money. The stolen goods that my mother-in-law had taken from my mother were recovered by Tony, and they were safely returned to me.
Mom, you have me and Kathy.
And at those words, I finally shed tears of relief. Martha and Kevin lost their house, had no money left, and now they are living in a company apartment again. Kevin, who had left the company apartment, is now back there with his mother, which has made them the subject of rumors about what might have happened. I received a message from the wife of one of Kevin's colleagues, who I have a friendly relationship with, so I told her the truth about what had happened, without any lies. The two of them will likely feel very uncomfortable living in the company apartment from now on, but they brought it upon themselves. Furthermore, after Kevin retires, they will lose their place to live and will be forced to save money from now on to prepare for a new home. From time to time, I think I might ask my friends about how they are doing, just as a topic of conversation. I continued to stay at Kathy's house for a while, but then Tony decided to get married. Taking this opportunity, he decided to build a new house. It seems the land where the in-laws' house stood sold for a decent amount, so I was glad to know that even that house could be of use.
Mom, come live with us.
Tony kindly offered to have me live with him. His fiancée also welcomed the idea, which I was very grateful for. Since I couldn't keep staying at Kathy's house indefinitely while she lived alone, I decided to accept his kind offer. I hope to live happily with my new family, making sure I never become a mother-in-law like mine was. How did you like this story? Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.